from 4.3% of GDP in 2022 to 0.5% in 2023. The fiscal consolidation will be executed by both mobilizing more domestic revenue and improving efficiency of spending. 2, to protect the vulnerable through enhancement of existing social protection programs, including the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty LEAP, National Health Insurance Scheme, the Capitation Grant, and the School Feeding Program. The 2023 budget, for example, doubled the benefits under the LEAP program, as well as boosted the allocations to the School Feeding Program. 3, strong and ambitious structural reforms in tax policy, revenue administration, public financial management, financial sector, as well as strong measures to enhance revenue mobilization and address weaknesses in the energy and cocoa sectors. Both are critical to bring public finances back on sustainable path while creating fiscal space for critical development spending. 4, to bring inflation under control through prudent monetary policy, including appropriate monetary policy tightening and the elimination of monetary financing of the budget. Containing inflation pressures requires coordination between fiscal and monetary policies. 5, to rebuild international reserve buffers to 3 months of import by the end of the program. The Bank of Ghana is pursuing enhanced flexible exchange rate policies to help rebuild international reserves. 6, to restore sustainability and preserve financial stability following the domestic debt exchange program to support private investments and growth. And 7, to pursue reforms to encourage private investments, strengthen growth, and create more jobs. Mr. Speaker, it is instructive to note that our path towards securing an approved IMF-supported program has been characterized by speed and resoluteness. More specifically, the following key and significant milestones were accomplished. Was largely supported by monetary policy tightening, relative stability in the exchange rate, and lower and stable export petroleum prices. Cumulatively, the Ghana cedi depreciated by 22.1% against the US dollar in the year to July 17, 2023, compared to 21.1% in the same period in 2022. The cedi, excluding the January 2023 depreciation of 20%, has depreciated by an impressive 1.8% between February and January 17, 2023. Total export receipts, Mr. Speaker, fell by 7.9% to $8.2 billion on the back of lower crude oil export receipts. Crude oil exports declined by 41.3% year-on-year due to a 21.4% decline in volumes and 25.3% fall in prices. Current accounts recorded a provisional surplus of $849 million compared with a deficit of $1.1 billion for the same period, 2022. And gross international reserves dropped from $6.2 billion at the end of December 2022 to $5.3 billion, $2.5 million in June 2023. reflecting BOGs reducing their foreign liabilities in line with the IMF program. Net international reserves received a boost from gold reserves and improved to 2.3 billion US dollars to 1.1 months of import cover compared to 1.4 billion or 0.6 months of import cover recorded at the end of December 2022. Mr. Speaker, on banking developments and the outlook, the banking sector posted unexpected, relatively strong performance during the first half of the year. Despite the lingering effects of the DDEP, the banks have reported increased deposits and investments, higher profitability, and return on equity of over 35%. The impact of the DDEP, such as the increase in non-performing loans, was partly moderated by the timely introduction of temporary regulatory reliefs. In the outlook, the operationalization of the $750 million US dollars Ghana Financial Stability Fund and the planned recapitalization of banks would ensure stability as well as strengthen financial intermediation to support the private sector. Mr. Speaker, the provincial data on government fiscal operation for the first half of 2023 indicate: 1. A slower pace in expenditure execution relative to revenue shortfall, resulting in an overall budget deficit on commitment basis of 6.3 billion Ghana cedis, 0.8% of GDP, compared to the 2023 half-year budget deficit targets of 28.3 billion or 3.5% of GDP. A corresponding primary balance on commitment basis of a surplus, Mr. Speaker, of 8.8 billion Ghana cedis, 1.1% of GDP, compared to the target of a surplus of 310 million Ghana cedis.
Everybody join us and sing. We are going heaven knows where.
3FM Sunrise.
We know within.
I think we need to remove our lenses. This is not a political issue. This is the people of Ghana. Come to a point where there's a crossroad, and therefore we need a transitional supervisory role. And I'm saying, look, Parliament should step in and supervise the restoration of capital. Now, if we do that, there will be sanity, there will be stability, and there will be confidence. And then there are other issues that we can bring in terms of separation of the function, because Bank of Ghana is operating treasury functions and policy functions. I think with time, we need to look at some of those. But for now, I'm advocating that, look, we need a transition in terms of supervisory role for restoration of capital. Because Bank of Ghana mandates now, given the opinion of the auditors, I think it would be appropriate on their own sense to ask a third party to step in transitionally. That doesn't mean we are taking their independence away.
Dr. Abuaji Deborah there is an economist and a consultant with us here at Media General. Also joining us on Zoom is Dr. Edu Sarkodie, is a lecturer, a senior lecturer I should say, and an economist with the University of Ghana. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you very much indeed for your time. How are you?
Thanks so much.
Great. Dr. Sarkodie, let me begin with you. The Bank of Ghana's annual report has revealed that things are not well with the Bank of Ghana. Was this expected?
What was expected?
The losses that have been declared by the Bank of Ghana. I mean, the Bank of Ghana will be known as the lender of last resort. He is in crisis. Was this expected?
Okay. Was it expected? Okay. Well, given the heavy burden on the shoulders of Bank of Ghana from the fiscal side, I've always maintained that there should be this equilibrium between the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. So most often than not, the monetary policy bails out the fiscal policy, so to speak. And so you can make reference to inflation, whilst the monetary policy is trying to fight inflation. The fiscals are not doing as much as they should, and the Bank of Ghana has to come in, the monetization of the budget deficit In other words, the Bank of Ghana coming to print money to finance the budget deficit, the domestic debt exchange programs, the cedi depreciation, all have really affected the assets of the Bank of Ghana. And so if you put all this together, it was expected that this thing will happen to the central bank. But it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, as you mentioned, the lender of last resort, the institution that is mandated to be the sole banker to the government is now more or less making these losses. And so it doesn't speak well of the bank, it doesn't speak well of the government, it doesn't speak well of our economy. And I don't think that we should get back to this level again, ever again. We have to put everything in place to make sure that the central bank functions effectively without making these losses.
Now, Doc, you talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy, that the monetary policy will bail out the fiscal policy. For the average man, what does this mean?
Yeah, what it means is that, so let's take, for example, the budget deficit. If the fiscal policy is said that they are able to narrow the budget deficit, that's the difference between revenue and expenditure. So the more deficit you incur, the more you have to finance it. And in financing the deficit, in other words, to find the extra money to meet your expenditure because the revenue is not enough. The government of Ghana, through the Ministry of Finance, would have to look for other areas to get that extra funding of revenue to finance the expenditure. So they can either go to the capital market, both domestic or the external capital market to borrow.
Right.
Because we have seen them borrow from the treasury bill, bonds, etc., etc. And they can also go to the central bank for some financing from the central bank. And you and I have read a report that, last year or so, they financed government's budget deficit so much, so much. And so that's what I mean by, the fiscal policy giving us some losses in terms of deficits, and then the monetary policy will have to come and finance it. And I think I understand why they hugely finance the budget deficit, because the capital market was shut. The government wasn't able to go to the international capital market, as we say, the Eurobond market. And even if they went there, it would have been at a higher cost. So they decided not to go. And so the only, as you said, the lender of last resort, the last resort that they had to consult was the Bank of Ghana to come and then bail them out of the huge budget deficit, to finance the budget deficit, which the IMF called the monetization of the fiscal, so the monetization of the budget deficit.
Dr. Deborah, let me bring you in. Are we in trouble, very serious trouble, extremely serious trouble, or beyond repair? Where are we?
Well, sisters, thanks so much. Sako dear, good morning. And then also let me say a big good morning to our cherished listeners. Let me say this, and let me go back, that what we are witnessing today has never happened in the history of Ghana. Now, we asked from 1952, when we had a Bank of Gold Coast, there was an agitation that we needed our own financial institution to be able to support growth and also lend money to indigenous people. And therefore, that led to the establishment of Bank of Gold Coast, which is now GCB Bank. So, but it was performing two functions, the central banking functions and the commercial banking functions.
All right.
So, when we had the independence in 1957, because you can't put the two eyes into the same bottle, the central banking functions first were moved, supported by the Act number 34 that led to the establishment of Bank of Ghana. So if you see GCB and Bank of Ghana facing each other, because Bank of Gold Coast, which is GCB Bank, was performing the functions of commercial banking functions and the central banking functions, but we separated it and gave it to Bank of Ghana. We've had a history over the years, and if we look at the evolution of banking, So we wanted to promote growth. If you look at the 5-7-year development plan by Kwame Nkrumah, we had the 3 pillars: agri, industry, and housing. So we had ADB supporting agri, we had the NIB supporting the industries, and then Bank for Housing and Construction for Housing. But these were the pillars to fast track growth.
Okay.
And then in 1972, we also had the capital markets, which Merchant Bank was established in 1972. Workers also agitated at the SSB. High purchase and leasing was established in in the 70s, 1977. And then we had the rural economy, rural banking. So if you look at it, these were, and then we had issues. So we had the ERP, and then it led to the FinSap 1, FinSap 2. Now, these were not, and we never had Bank of Ghana having what we are seeing today. So FinSap 1, FinSap 2, we never saw this.
Well,
unfortunately, since 1992 to date, and especially the last 8 years, the banking sector, as we speak today, are sitting on a debt through the domestic debt exchange program. Commercial banks are sitting on 35 billion. They publish only half of it. So if you look at what the sector minister was talking about, and I just want to put on record that these are management accounts. What banks are publishing dancing is just management accounts. They are not audited accounts. Because what was published out of the 35 billion, there's also sitting there, which have not been disclosed, which will come when they want to publish their results.
I see.
Commercial banks, and then secondly, the second tier of the domestic debt, which is cocoa financing or cocoa bills. Also, if you look at the net present value there, it's also having a low situation impacting on the balance sheet of the banks to the tune between 2 to 5.5 billion Ghana cedis. So if you add that, then you add it to Bank of Ghana 55 billion. So we are talking about over 100 billion that the industry. So in summary, what I just want to say is that the banking sector as we see today is on the crossroad.
So the crossroad will be, we're in serious trouble, very serious trouble, extremely serious trouble, or irreparable trouble. Where are we?
It depends. It depends the way we want to look at it. But if the two institutions, the commercial banking that are supposed to support the intermediation are on the floor or on the ground, and the central bank that is supposed to hold the legs and bring it up is also on the floor. Who helps each other?
I see.
And that is why I'm advocating a third party to come in and hold the hands of the two people on the floor and bring them up.
Well, we'll come to that third party conversation soon. But Dr. Sarkodie.
But what I want to say here is that where we've got to now is that it's a serious matter. It has never happened in the history of Ghana. If you look at the evolution of the banking from 1952 to date.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Sarkodie, stepping for me here, if you look at the internal expenditure of the Bank of Ghana per the report, the expenditure went beyond 100%. You had more than 2,000 staff and recorded a loss of 60.8 billion as at 31st of December 2022. Is this recklessness, incompetence, or is just carelessness? Where would you put the verdict? Hello, Dr. Sarkodie. Hello, Dr. Sarkodie. Well, Dr. Deborah, would you want to take that question?
Well, I wouldn't say it's one of the functions of the central bank is to support. It's a banker to the government, and therefore, in that process, to support. But what I just want to say is that in that process, it should support growth. So if you want to support government, and at the end of the day, it's inflating the economy, in other words, it's causing inflation, then that becomes problematic. Because don't forget that Bank of Ghana is a public institution.
Right.
And therefore, everybody in the country is interested in the outcome of Bank of Ghana. But whatever they do will have impact on everybody on the street. And therefore, even though they have their independence to sit there, whatever they do matter to everyone in the country.
Is the Bank of Ghana spending beyond what we can afford? Look, for example, the report reveals that we spent 131.586 million on motor and vehicle maintenance running as of December 2022. And this is far from 61.510 million cedis spent over the same period in 2021. That's a jump from whatever we saw there. Is the Bank of Ghana spending more than we can afford as a people?
I think it needs a lot of answers. And I think Parliament should invite the governor to come and explain, because some of these are not, we can look at, as analysts, we can look at the figures and just, I think we need better and further particulars on that expenditure. Because at the end of the day, maybe they just is going to support growth. Because what is more important is that any spending from Bank of Ghana should promote growth. And if it's not doing that, then the result becomes problematic and therefore becomes a judgment to the public. And therefore, from where I sit, I think the governor should be asked to come and explain these figures.
I see. We'll come to that third-party conversation, and my guest on Zoom, Dr. Edu Sarkodie. He's a lecturer with the University of Ghana. He's also an economist. And then Dr. Aboagye Deborah is an economist and a consultant with Media General. And we're discussing Ghana's economy and the crisis of this central bank. Where do we put the questions? Where do we get the answers from? Are we closer to the answers that we assumed, or are we far away from the answers? Dr. Deborah just said that, well, we require some more answers, and that the governor of the Bank of Ghana must be brought in to answer some of those questions that are nagging and lingering in the mind. I'm curious to want to find out how all of this plays out in the overall management of the economy, because agreed that the Bank of Ghana is the lender of last resort, and if they are in crisis, what exactly does that mean for our economy? We'll talk about banking supervision, for example. How much was spent, and then are we getting value for money in that corner? All of those questions come to mind. We'll try and reconnect with them on Zoom and pick their thoughts. But Helen, what do you say so far?
I would have liked to have asked Dr. Sarkodie about our extractive sector. And if we're saying that Ghana is the leading gold producer, number one on the continent, I wanted to find out how we can leverage on that, because how can gold and poverty reside under the same
You can't
roof?
live in harmony. It's not
Yes.
possible.
So, in terms of our extractive sector, can we look at what Botswana is doing with diamond, for example? And I think that brings us back to that conversation. William, you touched on this, that as much as we're being touted as the number one, as far as, gold is concerned, even cocoa, we're not seeing that reflect on the national purse. Because really, 3.7 million ounces of gold was produced last year, putting us at number one. So that should be telling us something.
Right.
We should be reflecting in our pockets.
But again, if you are getting all the revenue from gold and your government is recklessly borrowing, you heard me, the what do you call it? The government's budget deficit was supported heavily by the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana is supposed to support, but if they always come into support to cover up for inefficiencies and incompetence that could have been dealt with right from the get-go, it becomes a problem.
That's right.
So yes, you may be getting the gold. Granted that you may not be getting all the revenue that you would need from it because of the arrangements that govern those extractive areas. But then again, if your government's first resort is to run to the Bank of Ghana anytime you find themselves in trouble, then you really are in trouble. But we have Dr. Aboagye Deborah back on Zoom. He's an economist and a consultant here at Media General. Also, Dr. Edu Sarkodie is a senior lecturer and economist at the University of Ghana. Dr. Sarkodie, welcome back. Dr. Deborah, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so much. But before I just want to make a little comment on or remark on what the other lady was trying to, to the contribution coming from her in terms of the extractive sector.
Go ahead, please. All right.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think in the quick one, if we look at 2011 or 2015 to date, now gold exports to balance of payment has not been it's been more than $5 billion. Now, the question one should ask, why should we go to even IMF? And these are to incur what we term as social implications, where we are using pensioners' money and those things. I think we should have avoided these things. And I think that's the contribution she's bringing on board. I think in finance or in literature, there's what we call sale and purchase agreement. I think where the government should have been able to have conversation with those people in charge and say, look, can you hold on to this debt for me for, let's say, 5 years? And then I'll be able to save enough money. We didn't do that. Then when you do that within 5 years, you'll be able to, even on an annual basis, even $5 billion, you'll be able to give us about 30 billion at the end of the residual period. So it means that we clean the back. So the government will be owing this key sector, Newmont, and the rest there. Then you can do a debt equity swap at the end of the day. And then it means that the government becomes a shareholder in this. And when the mining right expires, and then you can decide that whether you want to own 100% of that. So there are a lot of conversation that if I was part of the advisors, I should have been able to advise rather than just to go. But we shouldn't forget. And at times, we made some statement which is a bit confusing in the literature, that IMF is coming to support Ghana.
Right.
It's a financing item in the balance of payment. It's not just to reform your economy. You are owing, and therefore your total exports, less imports, which will give you the trade balance, and then the net investment and the services. At the end of the day, the current account over the years we've been witnessing negative, and that is what is causing the depreciation of the cedi. And we have never looked at this. And that is where I have a problem, where we can do and look at, and that's where the lady is talking about, that we could use the extractive sector to be able to do sale and purchase agreement and then resolve this without even going to even market.
Is that not what, Dr. Deborah, is that not what the gold for oil, for example, sought to do?
No,
that it was going to bring down the prices of our fuel and all of that. It keeps going up anyway.
No, that is where, when the economy was rating as a junk, the commercial banks were not able to support the oil importing companies, which we call BDCs. And therefore, the central bank had to step in. And then just because if your economy is junk and then the correspondent banks are not prepared to help you, to give you lines. And even the big boys that have even lines are doing cashback transactions. So the question then is that the Bank of Ghana step in, and then that is the basis of the gold for oil. So I don't want to go into that kind of analysis here. But what I'm trying to propose is that you can use your extractive sector and do sale and purchase agreement, build enough savings, and then at the end of the day, you can do a debt equity swap, and then you become a shareholder in that sector. There are a lot of things.
The people managing, Dr. Deborah, the people managing our economy and working at the Bank of Ghana, don't they know this?
I'm not part. That's why I gave a caveat.
A caveat, right?
I'm not part of those. If I was part of it, going to IMF shouldn't have been the case. We could have in-house, build resources, and resolve the issues.
What's happening?
That is why I started that. It's unfortunate that we are witnessing what we are witnessing today.
What is happening at the Bank of Ghana now, sir? What impact does it have on our economy in the short, medium, and long term?
Well, I mean, if you look at the opinion of the auditor, Deloitte, I think he gave 3 key things there. That if you are insolvent, means that you don't have, your liabilities are more than your assets, and therefore you will not be able to pay your debts and expenses. Secondly, your mandate to stabilize the economy, you will not be able to have that resources because you are on the floor. What that means is that going concern becomes a big issue. So these 3 things matter for everyone. And that is why some of us think it's a dire consequence that we are. So it's a crossroad. And therefore, it should be a concern to everyone. The question is, when you are on the floor as a bankrupt,
right?
You have legs to be able to stand and then pursue stability.
Okay.
No.
What does this mean for commercial banks in the country? And here I'm asking this question because banks were collapsed in this country because they could not reach a certain minimum capital requirement, which means that they didn't have the liquid that they needed. Here's the Bank of Ghana, who is declaring losses. As you say, it has never happened before. Shouldn't heads be rolling at the Bank of Ghana, given the fact that they rolled heads at the commercial banks around the country for the same reasons?
3FM 90.
Well, it will be...
Johnny here.
It will be... Yeah, Johnny, sorry, yeah. Johnny, yes. It will be difficult to sit here and do that judgment and say, look, the stick you use to hate the commercial banks, because the 4 things they did that you used to collapse them, you have also committed the same thing. But we will leave that one to the owners. And then because we
Mr. Deborah, Dr. Deborah, you and I are the owners of the Bank of Ghana. We are the citizens, the owners of the Bank of Ghana.
We are stakeholders.
Right.
What I'm saying is that we have put people to represent us.
Right.
At the judicial legislature, parliament. And therefore, they should be able to invite and say, look, the implementation, the reforms, nobody is arguing that the reforms was not good. It was necessary. But the implementation was wrong. And if you look at my first lecture, which I said we should have used good and bad bank model. And that is the 25 billion that claim they use it to reform the whole institution.
Right.
Should have been used to ring-fence the non-performing loans and then save the jobs and to be able to keep government, because government gets a lot of revenue from banking sector. And to be honest with you, why government is not getting enough revenue, to some extent, is due to the implementation of the whole reforms. Because some banks' capacity is gone down. So I don't want to sit here and say, look, heads should be rolling at that place. I think we will leave that one to the owners. But what is important is that where we are now is an issue, and therefore we should find a resolution going forward.
If you were the governor of the Bank of Ghana in these times, what would you be doing?
I think I sympathize with my colleagues there. They are good friends. I sympathize with them. And I always, anytime I meet them, I tell them, look, I think they've taken their jobs and people's jobs and trying to pursue classical economic models. And I say classical because our economy is different. I mean, look, last week I said, look, we should begin to review the inflation targeting. Because you see, you are looking at the sources of inflation and you sit at Bank of Ghana and then you want to carry the same hat that should be carried by Minister of Agric and Minister of Trade and Transport, because they are causing inflation. And then else you'll be hurting the productive sectors. And that is where business people are angry. And that is where I have a challenge and say, look, I'm sympathizing with my colleagues. I think to some extent, they should have had the coordination among the stakeholders have not been let me say, has not been well coordinated, because fiscal policy and monetary policy, even though in theory are supposed to be coordinated, but in practice, is that what we are seeing? As Minister of Agri, is he aware that inflation is his KPI, key performance indicator? I don't think so. So just we had the food for, how do you call it?
Planting for food and jobs, right.
Plan for foods and jobs. When I heard it, I was so happy, because I thought the sources of inflation is going to be curtailed. Unfortunately, the outcome has been, has not been the best. So I think we should, the center, which is executive presidency, should hold his ministers accountable for not helping him.
I see. Dr. Edu Sarkodie, welcome back, and thank you for joining us. He is a senior lecturer and an economist with the University of Ghana. Thank you for joining us, Doc.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. But I'm just a lecturer, I'm not senior yet.
All right. Thank you for the correction. Doc, so the Bank of Ghana is expanding in terms of the staff, 2,215 staff, and recorded a loss of 60.8 billion. Over 100% of what were recorded in year 20 by the year 2022. If you compare that to what happened the previous year, are we getting value for money from the Bank of Ghana?
3FM 92.7.
The question is loaded. So let me try to answer in this way. You mean the workers there, are they functioning effectively?
Absolutely.
Is their productivity level okay? Is that a question?
Absolutely, because we are spending so much. Are we getting so much in return?
Well, yeah, because we are spending so much on that. Are we getting the work done? So I'll pick the answer from the core mandates of the central bank to ensure price stability with respect to inflation and exchange rates. And they're also to regulate the financial sector. They're also to influence economic growth, economic activities, and create jobs. They are to be the banker or the lender of last resort, as you said, to the government, etc., etc. So with these functions that they are supposed to perform, I think that they need the staff to perform those functions. If they had not made these losses, I'm not sure information like this would have been.
3FM 92.7.
Much, heated debate. We know the cause of the losses is not as a result of keeping huge staff, but it's as a result of the fiscal dominance, the debt exchange program, and some other losses that they incurred over the period. So yes, I'm not saying that we shouldn't worry or you shouldn't care about the productivity of the workers. That we should. If they are overstaffed, then they should reduce the staff. But I have not done any research to indicate that they are overstaffed over there. And I think that research must be undertaken to see that if there are too many people over there. Because I know your question is coming from the line item of the huge expenditure incurred
That's right.
by the staff in terms of travel, in terms of salaries,
That's right.
allowances and all that. And then we have to also undertake that report. In fact, in my view, the entire public sector and the quasi-government workers, there must be a comprehensive review of the number of staff and also the productivity. The biggest problem in our country is how to measure the productivity of government workers. When it comes to the private sector like TV2 or 3FM, it's much easier because monitoring and evaluation is so critical. But when it comes to the public sector, it becomes some way. And so it's difficult to place your hand on the strictly measured productivity level of workers. But I agree with you that given this huge expenditure on the staff, we have to look at it and then undertake a research or review of the staff over there to see if they are overstaffed, then we have to reduce it. And if per the functions, they need more staff, then they need to, employ more. But like I said, we are worried now because of the losses that they have made. And now that we know the root causes of the losses, we should make sure that we don't get to the same level ever again, because this sends a bad signal to the central bank a bad signal to the government and also a bad signal to the economy as a whole. You do not want your central bank to be making these huge losses. I think, let me check this one here. So in one of the platforms with my friend, somebody asked whether the Bank of Ghana, which is a central bank, can make profit or loss.
That's right.
And the answer is yes. And the answer is yes. And exactly what we have seen in the report. So you can have more assets than liabilities. In this case, you're making profit, and have more liabilities than assets, you are making losses. But the point is, I think that the person was asking the question from the angle that is a central bank a profit-making entity?
Exactly.
Okay, so there are two different things. The central bank is not like the Ghana Commercial Bank or Standard Chartered Bank or Absa Bank. It is not a profit-making entity, but they can make profits as long as they have liabilities and they have assets. So that's the distinction over there. So yes, we have to review or undertake a research to see whether they are overstaffed or not.
Doc, for foreign and domestic travel, the central bank spent 97,437,000. This indicated over 300% increase in 28.176 million recorded in 2021 alone. That is frightening, if you ask me, from where I sit. Do you get the sense that the Bank of Ghana considered the times in which we were in, where Ghanaians were being asked to tighten their belts and all of that, to have spent so much just on travels?
Well, Johnny, the answer to your question can be found in the details of the travel. When we have the itinerary, then we can actually extrapolate and then get the correct answer to your question. But I think that we can remember that in the year under review, that's 2022, that was the time the government of Ghana decided to perhaps have an engagement with the IMF.
Right,
so I'm not defending it, but I'm saying that within that period, it could be one of the reasons why we had huge jump in the foreign travels, because the staff level agreement with the IMF will always, or usually be between the staff of the Ministry of Finance and the staff of the central bank. So that could explain why we have that jump in the travel expenses. So on top of my head, this could be the only answer.
I see.
Unless maybe we get the details.
We'll get into that, I'm sure, in subsequent conversations. Doc, I'll come to Dr. Deborah in a bit, but let me ask you this. The finance minister says we have negotiated the bend and that the economy is in a better place than it was before. We also do know that per this report, a lot of the government budget deficit was supported from the central bank. What lies ahead if this trend continues? Finance Minister is telling us one thing, Bank of Ghana is reporting another thing, and then the future lies ahead of us. We have an IMF program running. What do you see?
I think that the first thing on my mind, like I said, the BOG, even with these losses, can still undertake its operations like banking supervision, like regulating the financial sector, like ensuring price stability, like, still can be still a banker to the government. What BOG is limited to do now will be the financing of the budget deficit. In fact, today I'll eat the humble pie, because before today, or before reading the report, I was always of the view that the zero financing from the central bank element in the IMF program should be reviewed, that they should allow the government some room to borrow from the central bank, maybe up to 5%, as we know, up to 5% of previous year's tax revenue. But looking at the losses they have made, in the report, I eat the humble pie. I don't think I want to stand by that position again. We should still go by the zero financing. In other words, I'm not sure that Bank of Ghana is now in a position to support the government through any monetization or any financing of their budget deficit now, today as we speak, or this year. I'm not sure they're in that position to do that. So that is the first point. The second one is the the point you made about the Minister of Finance saying we have taken 10.
The band and the economy is in a better place.
Reference to the other macro indicators. First of all, the GDP growth rate has been revised downwards, and that is not a positive sign. We know the cause. The root cause of that is a large front-loaded fiscal consolidation. In other words, in the IMF document, the government of Ghana is expected to reduce the fiscal deficit by 5.1 percentage points, not percent, but percentage points. In other words, the end of year 2022 budget deficit was 11.8%. So if you are to reduce it by 5.1 percentage points, you are saying that it should be reduced to 6.7%. Now, out of the 5.1 percentage points reduction in the budget deficit, which is supposed to be occurred in 3 years, 75% of that must be achieved this year. That is 3.8% of the 5.1 percentage points should be achieved this year. And it's the reason we have a narrow budget deficit through taxes and through a cut in the government expenditure. That is feeding into the slow growth of GDP. And it's expected from every economic principle.
Right.
Let me do some explanation here. I'm sure Mr. Debra can either correct me or say something otherwise. I made this point on TV3 with Roland, and I think Bernard Mona didn't agree with me. I said that when the GDP growth rate is growing at 1.5%, it is not a contraction, as some people have alleged. The only way you can talk of contraction is when GDP growth rate is negative. As long as the GDP growth rate is positive, it is still expansion. So a reduction of growth rate from 2.8% to 1.5% is not a contraction of GDP. It is only telling us that the speed with which GDP would increase has reduced. So an analogy of this is that when you are driving a car and you reduce the speed from, say, 50 kilometers per hour to 20 kilometers per hour, the car speed has been reduced, but the car is still moving forward. The car is not reversing, So that's my explanation on that.
I see.
Then the minister's point on other macro variables like inflation, which has been reduced from 54% to 42% presently, is a positive sign. It's a good sign. Though you and I know that 42% is still high.
That's right.
It's so high. We have to get back to single-digit inflation.
Right.
And I've made a point on TV3. Let me make it on your show that if we are not able to get to single-digit inflation, we have not arrived. So nobody should praise himself.
Point well.
We should pursue single-digit inflation. We should pursue single-digit interest rate, and we should pursue single-digit depreciation rate. That is the only way I'll commend any government for really making something significant.
Thank you.
So, the minister was just making reference to the downward trend. That is a good sign that inflation is declining.
Right.
It's also a good sign that the cedi depreciation is reducing, because last year by this time the cedi was depreciating around 54%. Today it's depreciating at 21%.
All right.
21% is still high, but it's better than 54%. I think it's on these levels that the minister was confident that there was a turnaround. And I think that when you see a downward trend in negative variables like inflation and exchange rate, it's a positive sign.
Great. Dr. Awajidabra, let's wrap up the conversation with you and ask you, you've spoken about a third party coming into the situation. Who is fit for this third party role, and how should it be done?
Okay, thanks so much. I think let me correct the wording. I think when we are speaking, before I come to this, in terms of what my colleague was trying to highlight, in terms of contraction, we are saying, look, you have projected to grow by 2.8. Unfortunately, you don't expect it. So we are saying that there will be a contraction from that 2.8 to 1.5, meaning that the expectations of Ghanaians should not be anything. We shouldn't expect anything from, because the economy is heading towards a decline, and that is not helpful. So I think we need to put some caveat around the choice of words we use. So I don't think the people who are using contraction necessarily are wrong it depends where they sit, because they are looking at what you projected initially and where you are heading.
All right.
So it means that the economy is heading towards a recession. And that is.
So, Dr. Deborah, let me come in. So Johnny.
Sir.
Yeah. If you say a contraction of the GDP growth rate, I agree with you. But a contraction of GDP is a no.
Yeah.
Because I know better that a contraction of the GDP value only occurs when the GDP growth rate is negative. And Johnny, you can ask any economist, any other, maybe apart from Dr. Deborah and myself, you can ask any other person what a contraction of GDP value means and what a contraction of GDP growth rate means.
Okay.
What I have heard is not a contraction of GDP growth rate.
Okay.
What I've heard so far is a contraction of GDP.
The value.
And I am just trying to explain that a positive growth rate of 1.5% is not a contraction of GDP value. But if the rate is being reduced from 2.8 to 1.5, you call it a contraction of the growth rate. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Deborah, now respond to my question on the third party and who is fit to do it and how it should be done.
Because of the timing, yes. Yes, I'm advocating
92.7.
for a third party. The reason is that the commercial banks, as we speak, are insolvent today. The central bank, as we speak today, is also insolvent. And therefore, you cannot, and morally, it's even not right for them even to supervise the restoration of capital. So I'm calling for a third party, and the third party should be a legislature, and that is Parliament. And under the Parliament, we have the Finance Committee. They have the authority to be able to supervise the whole entire capital restoration.
I see. Dr. Sarkodie, do you agree? Does the Bank of Ghana have the moral right to crack the whip in terms of its supervision of commercial banks, given the fact that they themselves have found themselves in this kind of mess?
The moral rights may not be there, but they still have the statutory mandate. They have a constitutional mandate to regulate the activities of the financial sector, which they will undertake. And I'm sure moving forward, just as they cracked the whip for the banking sector to recover and then recapitalize, I think that in the same way, going forward, they will put their house in order and will not incur such losses again. There has been so many questions about the independence of the central bank, the operational independence of the central bank. Of course, we know the governors are appointed and deputies are appointed by the government, so that political independence may not be there. But the operational independence is what has been put under some scrutiny this morning. I've heard it on a number of airwaves, on a number of programs, that the operational independence of the central bank, I think, should be improved. We should allow them to operate. We should allow them, if they say no, it should be no. If they say yes, it should be yes. We should allow them that freedom to operate. Because sometimes the government's hands may be tied because of the pushback from the government, the central government.
Right.
And I sympathize with the governor in any way.
So
he's my mentor. He's my mentor. So I sympathize with him, but I have to protect him.
Let me ask you this question, because he's your friend. I know you may be conflicted, but you know the conversation about the banking sector cleanup or collapse. The conversation is that the banks should have been made to remain, and then the faces or the individuals who may have committed the wrongs be made to go. People thought that that should be the way in which the cleanup could have been done so that jobs could have been saved as well. Now, here's the Bank of Ghana in this situation with this huge losses being declared. Should we use that model now and say the faces should go so that the Bank of Ghana as an institution remains?
Okay, so I agree to the model you propose that we should have penalized the managers or the shareholders or the executives of the banks, the collapsed banks, instead of. But it's a matter of choice. That's why I mentioned operational independence. If the central bank felt if they go this way, by collapsing them would have saved the banking sector. So that was an operational independence, and they made that choice. So should the executive go, the central bank executive go because they have made losses? I don't think that it is enough to sack them. We should allow them, give them some time to recover. If they are not able to recover within the medium term, then of course, the president who appointed them will have that right of obligation to reshuffle or change him. But as of now, I don't think that it's enough reason to call for the head of the executive of the central bank.
Thank you. Dr. Edu Sarkodie is a lecturer and economist with the University of Ghana. Dr. Aboagye Deborah, an economist and a consultant here at Media General. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.